Long before Rome was an empire, before it was even a republic, the Italian peninsula was this incredible mosaic of different peoples and cultures. And this is the story of one of those groups, the Umbro Sabellians. We're going to look at how immense pressure, mass migration, and a really wild sacred ritual ended up forging some of ancient Rome's greatest rivals.
You know, there's this quote from a historian that I think just perfectly captures the feel of this era. He said that trying to remember Italy's most ancient peoples is like the sound of bells from a town that has been sunk in the sea. It's such a haunting image, right? The history isn't loud and clear. It's faint, it's distant, it's something you have to strain to hear. And that's exactly where our story starts, with a people whose memory has almost vanished.
All right, so our story kicks off with the Umbrians. Now, you might hear that name and think of the small region in central Italy today, but once upon a time, they were a major force, with a territory that stretched way, way across the peninsula. I mean, just try to picture this. From the super fertile Po Valley all the way down towards central Italy, this was all Umbrian land. We could even see little echoes of their presence today in place names, like the River Umbro. For a long time, they were the established power. But of course, that was all about to change.
Every story like this has a catalyst, right? A big event that sets everything in motion. Well, for the Umbrians, it was the rise of a powerful new civilization right next door, to their west.
And that force? The Etruscans. Now, their arrival on the scene wasn't just some minor border skirmish. Oh, no. This was a fundamental shift in the balance of power in all of Italy. This new force wasn't just going to compete with the Umbrians, it was going to completely displace them and kick off a chain reaction that would reshape the entire peninsula.
And look, this wasn't a gradual decline. It was a dramatic, almost catastrophic collapse. Ancient tradition says the Etruscans took 300 towns from the Umbrians. 300! They were pushed out of their rich, fertile plains and cornered in the rugged Apennine Mountains. And the resentment ran so deep that the Etruscans were actually cursed by name in the sacred national prayers of the Umbrians. Imagine hating your neighbors that much.
So, what do? You're squeezed between the Etruscans on one side and other tribes on the other. Your ancestral lands are gone. While the Umbrian-related peoples turned to this truly extraordinary cultural practice to survive, something born out of sheer desperation and faith.
It's a question that echoes throughout history, isn't it? Do you stay and fight a losing battle? Do you just give in and assimilate? Or do you find another way? The Sabellian tribes, who were relatives of the Umbrians, they found another way. A sacred, ritualized kind of mass migration.
This ritual was called the Ver Sacrum, which means sacred spring, and it was basically a radical solution to the problems of overpopulation and not having enough land. It was this incredibly solemn vow that a tribe would make in a time of crisis. They would promise all the children born in a single spring to the gods. Then, when that whole generation came of age, they were exiled, sent out to find a new home, trusting that the gods would guide them.
So, how did this actually work? Well, it was a whole process. First, the vow, usually made during a war or a famine. Next, an entire generation of babies was marked as sacred to the gods. Once they grew up, they were sent away from their homeland forever. And here's the really mythic part. They believed a sacred animal, an emissary of the god Mars, would literally lead them to their new destiny. And this is where myth and history just beautifully intertwine. The legends of these exiled young people, following their sacred animal guides, became the origin stories for a whole host of new, powerful tribes that would spread across the mountains and valleys of Italy.
This ritual had huge, real-world consequences. One group, they followed a sacred ox, and they became the mighty Samnites. Another group was guided by a woodpecker, and they became the Picentes, literally the woodpecker people. A third band was led by a wolf, Hirpus in their dialect, and they became the Hirpini. Out of one crisis, a whole bunch of new nations were born.
And you know what? It worked. In the relative isolation of the mountains and the surrounding hills, these tribes grew strong. They were far away from the Etruscans, far from the Greek colonies, and, for a while, far from the growing power of the Latins. They developed their own way, hardening their culture in that rugged landscape and creating a society built on totally different principles than the one that was starting to grow on the banks of the Tiber.
And this brings us to the final, crucial point. Because the most successful of these new peoples, the Samnites, they developed a political system that was fundamentally, completely different from the one taking shape in a city on that Tiber River, a city called Rome.
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's so stark. On one side, you've got the Samnites, a loose confederation of rural communities. Their power was spread out, decentralized, and their policy was mostly defensive. When they expanded, It was usually because some volunteer bands went off to seek their own fortune. And then you've got Rome, a single, unified city-state. All power was centralized in the city itself, its policy was relentlessly aggressive, and every single conquest was a direct gain for the state.
As the source material puts it, you can basically see the entire future history of these two nations right here, in their opposing systems. Their futures, their inevitable bloody conflict, it was all written into their political DNA from the very beginning. The unified, hungry state versus the decentralized confederacy. It was a rivalry that was going to define the future of Italy.
So we're left with this question. Rome's model, well, it won. It created an empire that shaped the Western world. You can't deny how effective it was. But it is worth thinking about the alternative that was lost. That Sam Knight model of a confederation of equals. What strengths, what freedoms, what different kind of future just disappears when one system completely conquers another? It's something to think about.